like I was saying, Tim, it's so exciting. I just got to tell you about it. Wow, that's really wonderful. That's big news. It's just so great. Yeah, you won't believe it when I tell you because it is so wonderful every way. You ever see a story where the person is using gestures that are a little too big? The story person just kind of goes on in their story and they're so excited about it, they're hopping around on stage, and all you're thinking is, hey, cool it down a bit there. Cool your jets, guy. It's not that big a deal. You ever given a story like that? You get a little carried away with your story, keep on going about it, and pretty soon you got all these gestures and things going on, and you see the audience saying, "What? What is he doing up there? Why is he hopping around so much?" If you've ever experienced that, you know it's easy to get carried away with your gestures. Because a big challenge of stories is, how do I sell the story and get it across the audience? And often, if you have an audience and you don't get any reaction for it, you think, if I just make the gestures bigger and bigger, they'll be better and better. Because bigger is better. Well, not always the case. Not always the situation. In fact, sometimes you go out on stage, you have huge, huge, big gestures, and they don't mean anything, they don't connect, then there's a problem. And your story doesn't get across, it doesn't sell, it just lands flat. It sits there. You ever had that happen? If you've ever had a story land flat and sit there, then you really need to understand how to develop and build the story. You need to understand the subtleties of a story. Fortunately, they're pretty simple, pretty easy, and you can learn them. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how you can learn the subtleties, the little things you can do to make your story pop, make the characters come alive, make people get interested in what you're talking about without having to do a lot of this stuff. You don't need to do a lot of this stuff to get your audience's attention. Sometimes a very little gesture will be more effective than all the waving you're doing around up there. And you will learn today about how to make little gestures that mean a lot, that connect in with the audience, that get them involved, get them interested, get them thinking about your story, that get them really into your story. Because too much is too much. And anybody who says bigger is always better doesn't understand stories. Often subtlety sells. Subtlety sells. If we subtle and hint at things a little bit, then you can connect. Then you can make things happen. And just little gestures you make can make a big, big difference. So today, I want to lead you through the 3 P's. The 3 P's of selling the story. 3 little things you can do to affect the story and make the story interesting, get it going, get it exciting, get the audience involved. They're subtle things, they're little things. The audience may not even notice them because they're so subtle, but they're effective and they're powerful and they help to connect with the audience. So once you learn the 3 P's, you'll understand how to make that story connect. You will know how to make those big gestures smaller and more effective and more interesting. You'll get how to connect with the audience and you'll learn how to sell your story. And it begins with the first P. First P is very important, it's very powerful. And it's an example of how a little bit can go a long way. Just in understanding this one P, you can take your characters to a whole new level. These little subtle things will help express things and get across the audience what the big gestures don't. And it'll be less stressful for you because you won't have to do these huge, exaggerated gestures. Just a little thing will get that character across much better. One simple little thing you can do that's contained in that first P. Very powerful, very important, very useful as you're developing and building your character and your story. Because you want the audience to be able to picture the character in their mind. At the same time, you want to have so much stuff going on stage that you take the audience out of their own imagination. And this first P is about how important it is, those subtle things, little things are, to making an effective character in your story. And the first P is for posture. Posture. Now, you might know this, and if you don't, it's fine. Posture is the way you stand, how you stand on stage. So just little things can make a big difference. If you have somebody and they're old, maybe they got a little bit of a bad back. Kind of walk around like this. And that'll be enough to indicate an older person. A little bit of a back, a little bit of a crick. You don't have to do something huge and elaborate. A little thing can go a long way. It's all about how you stand. Get that character across. If you have a character who is big person, okay, that's fine. Maybe you stand a little bit like this, indicate they're big, or bigger. Your body posture can communicate so much, little tiny things about your body posture and the way you use your body can really, really deeply communicate. Posture. And what happens quite often, you're doing your speech, you're going through, and you're doing the character, you don't really get involved in the posture, and so the characters seem unbelievable. People think, what the heck type of character is that? I can't really tell. It flaps its arms a lot, I can tell that much about it. Runs around, screams a lot. What really is it? On the other hand, do this a little bit, walk out on stage, a little bit of this. The audience instantly thinks, oh, yeah, that's an older person. I get it. They got a bad back. Okay, I get it. That's fine. And you can do all sorts of strutting around stage, going around. People say, what is that supposed to be? You know, this kind of thing. People say, is it the Hulk? Is it Frankenstein coming out there? They don't get it. But if you just do this, you say, oh, yeah, okay. Big guy. I get it. Big guy. Little things you can do. And of course, do this. Pregnant guy. No. If you do that, it's a big guy in front. Bit of a gut. Posture. First P is posture. First P is powerful. Posture is very important. But posture by itself isn't quite enough. You need to have something a little bit more. You need to have a little bit more assistance, a little bit more help. Once you got posture, you're great. You're well on your way. Fine. You aren't going to exaggerate. Just little things, and that's great. Fantastic. But there is the question about how do the characters relate to each other? How do you indicate which character is who and which one is what? If you've got a kid and you've got an adult, if you've got an older person, a younger person, how do you show that contrast between characters? Well, the way you show that is with the second P. Second P will help you bring out that contrast between characters and still keep it very subtle. And it's the second P where things really start to get subtle. We start to hint at things, and the audience kind of catches on whether they realize it or not. With the first P, posture, you could show things, little things, and the audience would catch on to that pretty obviously, no problem. Big guy, older person, audience would catch on to that. With the second P, it's a little more subtle. It's an important thing to do, but it's something the audience may not be as aware of unless you do it for exaggeration or for some sort of humorous effect, or you want to be funny about it. Great, you can use it that way. But in general, it'll be a subtle thing. And it'll be this subtlety that'll communicate with the audience and help really connect in, really make that connection to the story. And the second P is position. Position. How you position yourself on the stage has a lot to do with how well that character works and interacts with the other characters you have in your story. So positioning yourself on the stage is very important. Little positioning things you can do indicate a lot of things. For instance, one of the simplest ones, the most powerful one, is when an adult is speaking to a child. When an adult speaks to a child, the adult looks down. So if you're talking to a child, you talk like that, looking down. And similarly, when a child is talking to an adult, the child looks up. And that's a simple way that you can use position to show different heights, to show who's taller, who's shorter, who's the child, who's the adult. You can also use position as a way to show the difference between things. So if you have the position of the older person talking, and then you have a position of a younger person talking, maybe there's a different attitude, a different way. In the older person, we said, is kind of like this, bent over. And maybe when they position themselves, they're kind of position themselves a little bit with the squat knees, and that's all part of it, how they position themselves at the stage. Part of the posture, part of the position. And when the younger person positions themselves, they position themselves a little more, hey, taking charge of things. And it's a subtle difference between posture and position. Posture is about your overall, what sort of posture you're using to indicate the way you get that character across to your audience. Positioning has to do with how the characters interrelate with each other. So a little bit higher, looking high, or looking low is a simple one. And you can position it also in different places on stage, too. So where one character meets another character here, and then later on they meet another character over there. Little things like that you can call back to. Positioning is one of those things you can explore, you can develop, and just see what little positioning changes you can make in terms of how you look or where you look, as far as each can get this character across, get each character across the audience. So far, we've covered 2 of the 3 P's. The third P is perhaps the most subtle, and unfortunately, the most abused. Once you understand this P, it's very easy to make people understand that the characters and the nature between the characters. Make the audience understand when you're switching from one character to the other. This third P is very useful, powerful, but if you overdo it, again with overly grand gestures, there's going to be a problem. If you do the third P well, it's the icing on the cake, and it finishes up how you position yourself and sell your characters, sell your story to the audience. third P is the most important. And it's separate from the other two P's. The other two P's of posture and position are very similar. Very much the similar kind of thing. So posture, and whether you're looking up or looking down, these things are a little bit similar. But the third P is different. The third P is really the most important of all the three P's. You can get this down. If you can get this subtle, your characters will seem lifelike and interesting. Your stories will sell. Your audience will be involved. You won't even really know what's going on. They'll just get a sense of, yeah, I believe that story. I believe those characters. That makes sense. Unfortunately, the third P is often done the wrong way. And for many years, I did the third P the wrong way. And because I did the third P the wrong way, I had characters that seemed stiff. They weren't believable. The stories didn't flow. And I kept doing it for a long time until I understood the value of being subtle, especially with this third P. To be subtle, to do little things back and forth, and how that would work better than the abrupt things I'd always been doing. It's easy with the third P to get into doing really abrupt changes. But if you can keep it subtle, really make things work well in your stories. And that third P is pivot. Pivot. Major challenge when telling a story and you've got characters in it is to letting the audience know when you're moving from one character talking to another character talking. One way to do that is to do a pivot. So your one character's here and then it's here, back and forth. And what I did for the longest time is I did it just like that. The whole goal was to try to quickly switch between characters. So talking here and then boom, talking here and then so I'd talk like this character and then all of a sudden talk like that. Hi, how are you doing, Bob? Oh, just great, Tim. How are you? Oh, I'm fine. And the goal was to try to make it look like there was two people talking. One person on one side, one person on the other. And that was what I thought of as the pivot. The problem was, it looked silly. And I've talked about this before. There's another presentation given that you can find on the web. Mentions all this sort of thing before. How silly it looks to do this, and this, and this. More like an aerobic exercise, much more than telling a story. So the secret about the pivot is to keep things subtle. Sure, you're changing between characters, but just little movements here and there to indicate it. So, for example, say, I was talking to Bob. I said, Bob, how are you doing? I said, Tim, how are you? You don't look so good. I said, Bob, what do you mean I don't look so good? I don't know, Tim. There's something wrong. I sense it. I know these things. Pivot. Looking here, over to here. Now the thing about it is, even with a little movement of the body, just a little movement, nothing major, just a little bit this, a little bit that. It's simple enough to do, and it still can keep connection with my audience. The problem about the pivot the way I was doing it looked silly, but it also meant I was staring off on the stage quite often. That's why I'm looking at everybody out there, they're looking at me, making that interconnection. So the third P is the pivot. The important thing about the pivot is to keep it subtle. So I gesture here for I'm talking, I'm the one talking, and change the hands a little bit when Bob's talking. However I do it, just a little bit of movement back and forth. Hey Bob, how are you doing? Well, Tim, not so good. Well, that can be a challenge, Bob. Little subtle, back and forth, little bit of movement, and it helps things flow. It helps things connect together. So that third P, the pivot, is very important. Don't overdo it. Keep it subtle. Keep it easy. And if you master that third P, the pivot, that can help a lot selling your story. So in conclusion, If you want to sell your story, you've got to know the 3 P's. 3 P's are very important to selling the story across. And the first P is all about your posture. How you stand on stage has a lot to do with the message you get across to your audience. It has to do with the way that the characters are seen in your stories. And that has to do with how the stories play out in your audience's mind. So think about posture. Just a little posture change make the difference. All of a sudden a person can go from being middle-aged to being older. Just with a little posture change. And think about position. How do you position yourself? Posture and position are kind of similar. Position about whether you're looking up, you're looking down, looking to the side. Little tiny things you do with your head or looking up or down on the side, that's different. Posture is kind of a full body thing. Position is a small thing. And it could even extend to some place where you position yourself on the stage, depending upon where people are and what they're doing in your story. Position will help for people to understand, for the audience to understand, what's the relationship between the two. Like child, adult, and how do these people interrelate with each other? Posture and position are very closely related. And it can be argued how much of a difference there is between the two. That can be something you can discuss and argue and think about. They're similar, they're a little bit different. But the third P is very, very different and very, very important. The third P is pivot. Pivot. And pivot has to do with how you transition between characters. So one character is talking and then another character is talking. You kind of go back and forth. So even with one character is talking, you still look at the whole room. But then you get the other character talking. You can still use the whole room. There has to be something that gives that slight hint that, okay, now one person's talking, now another person's talking. It could be a turn to the side, looking at this side, looking at that side. It could be a body shift, slight body shift, but nothing major. Again, these are small, subtle movements, not large, major movements. When you master the 3 Ps, you'll notice that your characters start to pop. They get interesting. People get interested. And they may look at you differently and think that you're somebody who knows what they're talking about. They may respect you and your stories and your storytelling abilities. You may find that you don't waste so much time trying to set up all the characters because your body naturally, through posture and pivot and position, naturally show what's going on with the characters. You don't have to explain things as much. So you save a lot of time that way in setting up your characters. You find you just enjoy it more on stage. Once you have posture, position, and pivoting down, you enjoy it. You get into the story. You have more time to get into the story and just enjoy being up there, telling the story and sharing something with other people. And you can do more stories. Without worrying about saving it up, without all that time wasted, you can get more done, do more stories, do more speaking, without being so concerned about how you set things up. So the 3 Ps are very simple, very subtle, very powerful. And if you keep in mind the 3 Ps when you're up there and presenting, your stories flow effortlessly. People understand just little things you're doing on stage. They get this picture in their head. It's all about the picture in their head for telling stories. When you're telling a story, it's all about getting that picture in the head to the audience. The 3 Ps, the audience will get the story easily and get that vivid picture in their head that makes for a great story.